Some mistakes reveal themselves immediately. Others take exactly 22 minutes. When Diana Castellano fired me at 7:58 a.m. for consistently low productivity, she thought she was eliminating a problem employee before her morning latte grew cold. What she actually did was trigger the collapse of a $1.2 billion defense contract that I had personally negotiated, secured, and controlled through a web of relationships she never bothered to understand. By 8:20 a.m., while she was probably still congratulating herself on her decisive leadership, Phoenix Global Defense was hemorrhaging money and credibility at a rate that would make bankruptcy lawyers salivate. My name is Victoria Cross, and at 41, I had spent the last 7 years building Phoenix Global into a premier defense contractor through methodical relationship building, technical expertise, and the kind of quiet competence that executives like Diana mistake for expendability. I held advanced degrees in aerospace engineering and international business, spoke 4 languages fluently, and had cultivated personal relationships with procurement officials across 3 continents. Yet somehow in Diana's quarterly performance review, I was classified as underperforming and resistant to new management initiatives. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so professionally devastating. Diana had joined Phoenix Global 6 months earlier as Chief Operating Officer, recruited from a civilian consulting firm with promises to modernize operations and optimize human capital efficiency. She arrived with an MBA from Wharton, a collection of management buzzwords, and absolutely no understanding of how defense contracting actually worked. Within weeks, she was implementing productivity metrics that measured email volume and meeting attendance, while completely ignoring the multi-million-dollar contracts that kept the company profitable. I should have seen the termination coming when Diana announced her performance optimization initiative 3 weeks prior. She scheduled individual meetings with every department head to discuss alignment opportunities and strategic resource allocation. When my turn came, she sat across from me in the sterile conference room she'd claimed as her personal domain, laptop open, fingers poised to take notes that would eventually justify whatever decision she'd already made. "Victoria," she began, her voice carrying the artificial warmth of someone who'd read too many leadership books, "I've been reviewing your productivity metrics, and I'm concerned about some patterns I'm seeing." I leaned back in my chair, genuinely curious about what patterns she thought she'd identified. "What kind of patterns, Diana?" She turned her laptop screen toward me, displaying a colorful chart that looked like it had been generated by business intelligence software designed for retail operations. "Your email output is 47% below department average, your meeting attendance is inconsistent, and your time tracking logs show significant gaps in documented productive activity." I studied the chart, noting how it reduced 7 years of aerospace engineering and international relationship management to metrics that would be more appropriate for measuring call center performance. "Diana, those gaps you're seeing, that's when I'm on site with clients in classified facilities where personal devices aren't permitted. The low email volume reflects face-to-face meetings that can't be conducted electronically due to security protocols. And the meeting attendance issues are because I'm frequently traveling to military installations across different time zones." She nodded with the patronizing expression of someone who'd already made up her mind. "I understand that defense work has unique requirements, but we need to find ways to quantify value-added activities in measurable terms. The board is asking for data-driven performance assessments, and your numbers don't tell a compelling story." That should have been my first warning. Diana was reducing complex defense relationships to spreadsheet entries, treating classified military contracts like consumer products, and applying civilian productivity metrics to work that operated under entirely different principles. But I assumed she'd learn that someone would explain to her how defense contracting actually functioned, that competence would eventually overcome ignorance. I was wrong. Diana's management philosophy was built on the assumption that all business activities could be optimized through standardized metrics and process improvements. She didn't understand that in defense work, a single conversation with the right procurement official could be worth more than 100 internal meetings. She couldn't quantify the value of trust relationships that took years to develop, or measure the ROI of expertise that prevented costly technical mistakes. The Atlas Defense Systems contract exemplified everything Diana failed to comprehend about my actual contributions to Phoenix Global. Atlas was a premier military contractor that specialized in advanced radar systems for naval applications. 3 years earlier, I had identified them as an ideal strategic partner for Phoenix's emerging drone technology division. What followed was 18 months of relationship building, technical collaboration, and careful negotiation that culminated in a partnership agreement worth $1.2 billion over 5 years. But the Atlas contract wasn't structured like the simple vendor agreements Diana was familiar with from her consulting background. It was a complex web of technical specifications, security clearances, milestone payments, and relationship dependencies that required constant maintenance and personal oversight. The contract specifically designated Phoenix Global's senior technical liaison as the primary point of contact for all Atlas interactions, and by mutual agreement between both companies, that designation belonged to me personally. Diana never bothered to read the Atlas contract in detail. If she had, she would have discovered that the agreement included termination clauses that could be triggered if key personnel were removed without Atlas's consent. She would have learned that the contract required specific security clearances that took months to obtain and couldn't be easily transferred between employees. Most critically, she would have understood that my personal relationships with Atlas executives weren't just professional courtesy. They were contractual obligations that kept $1.2 billion flowing into Phoenix Global's accounts. The morning of my termination started like any other Tuesday. I arrived at the office at 7:15 a.m., earlier than most of my colleagues, carrying the usual collection of classified briefing materials and technical specifications that define my daily routine. I had meetings scheduled with Atlas representatives at 10 o'clock a.m. and 2 o'clock p.m., both critical sessions for the next phase of our radar integration project. Diana was waiting in my office when I arrived, flanked by Marcus Webb from Human Resources and a security guard I didn't recognize. The setup was clearly orchestrated for maximum efficiency and minimal discussion. On my desk sat a cardboard box, empty but ominous, and a manila envelope that undoubtedly contained termination paperwork. "Victoria, please sit down," Diana said, her voice carrying the practiced calm of someone who'd rehearsed this conversation multiple times. "We need to discuss some changes to your role at Phoenix Global." I remained standing, setting my briefing materials on the desk next to the cardboard box. Changes to my role or termination of my employment. Marcus Webb shifted uncomfortably, probably recognizing that I wasn't going to make this easy for them. "Victoria, after careful consideration of your performance metrics and alignment with company objectives, we've decided that your position is no longer sustainable in its current form." "Let me translate," I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through my system. "You're firing me because Diana's spreadsheets don't capture the value of defense contracting relationships." Diana's expression hardened. "Your consistently low productivity has become a drag on departmental efficiency. We need team members who can demonstrate measurable contributions to company objectives." I checked my watch, 7:57 a.m. In 3 minutes, I would officially become a former Phoenix Global employee. In 23 minutes, Diana would begin to understand exactly what she'd just destroyed. "I assume you'll need immediate transition of my active projects," I said, opening the manila envelope and scanning the termination documents. "The Atlas defense contract alone requires specific security clearances and established relationships that took 3 years to develop." "We'll handle all transition activities," Diana replied with the confidence of someone who had no idea what she was attempting to handle. "Marcus has identified internal resources who can assume your responsibilities." I signed the termination documents with deliberate care, noting the 7:58 a.m. timestamp that Marcus entered for official records. 7 years of building Phoenix Global's most profitable relationships, reduced to a signature and a timestamp in a human resources file. The security guard escorted me to my car with the cardboard box containing my personal items, a collection of family photos, engineering textbooks, and industry awards that suddenly seemed inadequate to represent nearly a decade of professional achievement. As I drove out of the Phoenix Global parking lot for the final time, I used my hands-free system to make the first of several phone calls that would reshape the defense contracting landscape before Diana finished her morning coffee. "Colonel Patterson, this is Victoria Cross. I need to inform you that my employment status with Phoenix Global has changed as of 7:58 this morning. I'm no longer authorized to represent Phoenix in our Atlas defense discussions." Colonel James Patterson had been my primary contact at Atlas Defense for 3 years. We'd worked together through technical crises, budget negotiations, and security reviews that had strengthened both our professional relationship and mutual respect. His response was immediate and concerned. "Victoria, what happened?" "We have critical milestone reviews scheduled for today." "I was terminated for low productivity," I replied, allowing a note of bitter irony to color my voice. Diana Castellano, Phoenix's new COO, decided that my performance metrics didn't justify continued employment. The silence that followed lasted long enough for me to navigate through 2 traffic lights. When Colonel Patterson spoke again, his tone had shifted from concerned to professionally alarmed. Victoria, you understand that the Atlas Phoenix contract specifically designates you as the senior technical liaison. Your termination could trigger our personnel stability clauses. I pulled into a parking lot and retrieved my personal copy of the Atlas contract from my briefcase. Section 12.3, Personnel Continuity Requirements. I'm reading it now. Any changes to key personnel require Atlas consent and a 90-day transition period. Phoenix just violated those terms by terminating me without prior consultation. Jesus Christ, Colonel Patterson breathed. Victoria, this could put the entire contract in jeopardy. We can't proceed with technical reviews if Phoenix has compromised our established communication protocols. I checked my watch, 8:15 a.m. 17 minutes since my termination, and the first domino was already falling. Colonel, I need to make additional notifications. Can Atlas suspend all Phoenix interactions until this personnel issue is resolved? Consider it done. I'm calling an emergency meeting for 8:30. Victoria, where does this leave us in terms of project continuity? That depends on what Phoenix is willing to negotiate, I replied. I'm no longer their employee, but I'm still available as an independent contractor if Atlas prefers to maintain established relationships. The second call went to Admiral Sarah Chen at Naval Systems Command, where Phoenix Global held another $300 million in active contracts that required my specific security clearances and technical expertise. The third call reached Dr. Michael Torres at Defense Innovation Unit, where I'd been the primary liaison for $500 million in research partnerships. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Shock at my sudden termination, concern about contract continuity, and immediate suspension of Phoenix Global activities pending resolution of personnel issues. By 8:20 a.m., I had effectively frozen $2 billion in defense contracts, not through sabotage or corporate espionage, but simply by following proper notification protocols for personnel changes in classified defense work. My phone rang as I was drafting email notifications to the remaining contract stakeholders. Diana Castellano's name appeared on the caller ID, and I allowed myself a small smile before answering. Victoria, we need to talk immediately. Diana's voice had lost its earlier confidence, replaced by the tight control of someone trying to manage a crisis she didn't understand. Good morning, Diana. I assume this is regarding the contract notifications I've been making since my termination. What notifications? What are you talking about? I pulled up my call log, noting the precise timestamps of each conversation. Security protocols require immediate notification when personnel with active clearances change employment status. I've contacted Atlas Defense, Naval Systems Command, and Defense Innovation Unit to inform them that I'm no longer authorized to represent Phoenix Global. The silence stretched long enough for me to wonder if the call had dropped. When Diana spoke again, her voice was strained. Victoria, those contracts don't depend on individual employees. The company maintains the relationships. Actually, Diana, if you'd read the contracts before terminating me, you'd know that many of them specifically designate individual personnel as authorized representatives. My termination without client consent violates those agreements. This is ridiculous. You can't hold the company hostage because you're angry about being fired. I felt a cold satisfaction at her growing panic. I'm not holding anyone hostage. I'm following proper procedures for personnel changes in classified defense work, something you should have considered before deciding I was expendable. What do you want, Victoria? The question I'd been expecting since 7:58 a.m. Diana was beginning to understand that her productivity metrics had just destroyed the foundation of Phoenix Global's profitability. I want you to understand that defense contracting isn't like civilian consulting, Diana. Relationships matter more than spreadsheets. Trust takes years to build and minutes to destroy, and terminating key personnel without understanding their actual role in company operations can be catastrophically expensive. Can you fix this? I checked my watch. 8:23 a.m., 25 minutes since my termination, and Diana was already begging for solutions to problems she'd created through ignorance and arrogance. I can make some phone calls, I replied carefully. But the contract terms are clear. Personnel changes require client consent and transition periods. Phoenix violated those agreements when you fired me without consultation. What would it take to resolve this situation? A conversation with Phoenix's board of directors about proper transition procedures and the actual value of client relationships. In person this morning with full authority to negotiate contract continuity. Diana agreed immediately, her earlier confidence replaced by desperate accommodation. We scheduled a meeting for 9 a.m., giving me just enough time to prepare documentation that would educate Phoenix Global's leadership about the true cost of their COO's productivity optimization initiative. The Phoenix Global boardroom had been designed to intimidate: floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a massive conference table that could seat 20 executives, and technology displays that suggested cutting-edge innovation. When I walked in at 8:58 a.m., 6 board members were already seated, their expressions ranging from concerned to openly hostile. Diana sat at the head of the table, looking like someone who'd spent the last hour explaining to angry executives how she'd accidentally destroyed their company's most profitable relationships. To her right sat Thomas Morrison, Phoenix Global's CEO, a former Air Force colonel who understood defense contracting well enough to recognize the magnitude of Diana's mistake. "Victoria," Morrison began, his voice carrying the clipped precision of military communication, "Diana has briefed us on the situation. We need to understand exactly what's happened to our contract portfolio." I set my briefcase on the conference table and opened it deliberately, removing copies of contract documents, communication logs, and personnel designation letters that told the story of Phoenix Global's current crisis. As of 8:20 this morning, approximately $2 billion in active defense contracts have been suspended pending resolution of personnel continuity issues. I began, distributing copies of the relevant documentation. The Atlas Defense Systems contract specifically requires client consent for key personnel changes. Naval Systems Command has suspended all classified briefings until security clearance issues are resolved. Defense Innovation Unit has frozen research partnerships until authorized representatives can be confirmed. The boardroom fell silent as executives absorbed the implications. Thomas Morrison's face had gone pale as he reviewed the Atlas contract language that clearly designated me as the required point of contact for technical coordination. "Victoria," Morrison said quietly, "Diana tells me you were terminated for performance issues. How do we resolve this situation while maintaining proper employment standards?" I had prepared for this question during the 37 minutes since my termination had transformed into a corporate crisis. "Colonel Morrison, the performance metrics Diana used to justify my termination don't account for classified work that can't be documented in conventional productivity systems. Defense contracting requires relationship management, security protocols, and technical expertise that don't translate well to email volume and meeting attendance statistics." Diana shifted uncomfortably as I continued. "The Atlas contract alone generates $240 million annually for Phoenix Global. Naval Systems Command provides another $300 million. These relationships took years to develop and require constant maintenance through personal interaction, not automated processes. What would it take to restore contract continuity?" asked Barbara Chen, Phoenix's chief financial officer, who was probably calculating the revenue impact of $2 billion in suspended contracts. "Immediate reinstatement with appropriate recognition of my role in client relationships," I replied. "Revised performance evaluation criteria that account for classified defense work. And a commitment from executive leadership to understand the actual requirements of defense contracting before implementing productivity initiatives." The board members exchanged glances that suggested rapid consensus building. Thomas Morrison leaned forward, his expression grave. "Victoria, we're prepared to offer immediate reinstatement with a promotion to Senior Vice President of Defense Relations. Your compensation would be adjusted accordingly, and you'd report directly to me rather than through Diana's operational structure." I felt a moment of vindication, followed immediately by a deeper recognition of what had just occurred. In 39 minutes, Diana's ignorance had elevated me from expendable employee to senior executive, simply because she'd never bothered to understand the relationships that generated Phoenix Global's profits. "I accept those terms, Colonel Morrison. I can have most contracts reactivated by end of business today, assuming we establish proper protocols for future personnel decisions." The meeting concluded with handshakes, revised employment agreements, and a profound shift in Phoenix Global's management hierarchy. Diana remained COO, but her authority over defense operations had been effectively eliminated. I walked out of the boardroom with a corner office, a 40% salary increase, and direct control over the relationships that kept Phoenix Global profitable. By 10 o'clock a.m., I was back in my new office, making the phone calls that would restore normalcy to $2 billion in defense contracts. Colonel Patterson at Atlas Defense was relieved to hear that personnel issues had been resolved. Admiral Chen confirmed that Naval Systems Command would resume normal operations immediately. Dr. Torres at Defense Innovation Unit scheduled a meeting to discuss expanded research partnerships. The most satisfying conversation was with Diana herself, who appeared in my office doorway at 10:15 a.m., looking like someone who'd just experienced a masterclass in the consequences of underestimating competent employees. "Victoria, I need to apologize for this morning's misunderstanding," she began, her voice carrying the careful humility of someone who'd learned painful lessons about corporate power dynamics. "Deanna, it wasn't a misunderstanding," I replied, organizing the contract files that would now report directly to the CEO's office. "You terminated me because your productivity metrics couldn't quantify the value of defense relationships. You nearly destroyed this company because you applied civilian consulting principles to military contracting work." She sat down across from my desk, looking smaller somehow than she had 3 hours earlier. "I realize now that I didn't fully understand your role in client management." "You didn't try to understand," I corrected. "You assumed that all work could be measured through the same metrics, that all relationships could be managed through the same processes. In defense contracting, that assumption costs billions." Diana nodded, accepting the criticism with the resignation of someone whose authority had been permanently diminished. "What can I do to prevent similar issues in the future?" I leaned back in my chair, considering the woman who tried to destroy my career and inadvertently elevated it instead. "Learn the business before you try to optimize it. Understand the relationships before you attempt to measure them, and never assume that quiet competence means expendability." 3 months later, Phoenix Global announced record quarterly profits driven primarily by expanded defense partnerships and improved client relationships. The company's annual report specifically highlighted the importance of personnel continuity in defense contracting, noting how individual expertise and relationship management contribute to sustainable growth. Diana Castellano left Phoenix Global 6 weeks after our boardroom confrontation, accepting a position at a civilian consulting firm where her productivity optimization expertise would be more appropriate for the business environment. Her departure was noted briefly in industry publications, described as a strategic career transition that would allow her to pursue new challenges in operational excellence. I received an email from her on her last day, surprisingly thoughtful and more honest than I'd expected. "Victoria, I learned more about leadership in 39 minutes this morning than in 6 years of business school and consulting work. I let arrogance and ignorance cloud my judgment about people whose contributions I didn't understand. Your work was extraordinary, and I should have recognized that from the beginning. Thank you for teaching me the difference between measuring activity and measuring value. I hope Phoenix Global continues to thrive under your leadership." I read the email twice, then filed it as a reminder that competence, properly protected and professionally asserted, will always overcome ignorant management and misguided productivity initiatives. Today, Phoenix Global's defense division generates over $3 billion annually through partnerships I've cultivated and maintained over nearly a decade of relationship building. We operate under principles that Diana Castellano never understood, that trust is more valuable than efficiency, that expertise trumps metrics, and that sustainable success comes from understanding clients' actual needs rather than optimizing internal processes. The conference room where Diana fired me has been renovated and renamed the Client Relations Center, where we host regular meetings with defense contractors, military officials, and government procurement specialists. The wall displays our active contracts and partnership agreements, a visual reminder of the relationships that make everything else possible. Every new hire at Phoenix Global receives orientation that includes a detailed explanation of how defense contracting differs from civilian business practices. We emphasize the importance of security protocols, relationship management, and the kind of long-term thinking that builds sustainable partnerships rather than quarterly performance metrics. When management consulting firms approach us with productivity optimization proposals, I share the story of Diana Castellano's 22-minute education in the consequences of applying inappropriate metrics to specialized work. It's become a cautionary tale that circulates through defense contracting circles, a reminder that competence and relationships matter more than spreadsheets and email volume. I still arrive at the office at 7:15 a.m., carrying classified briefing materials and technical specifications that define my daily routine. The difference is that now, when new COOs or productivity consultants suggest optimization initiatives, everyone remembers the morning when Phoenix Global nearly lost $2 billion because someone confused activity with achievement. Diana Castellano fired me at 7:58 a.m. for consistently low productivity, convinced she was eliminating dead weight before breakfast. By 8:20 a.m., she'd learned that sometimes the quietest employees control the loudest revenue streams, that relationships built over years can be destroyed in minutes, and that true productivity in specialized industries can't be measured by generic metrics designed for generic businesses. She thought she was firing an underperforming employee. What she actually did was trigger a masterclass in the difference between managing activities and managing value, between measuring inputs and understanding outcomes, between optimizing processes and preserving the relationships that make those processes profitable. The lesson of that morning extends beyond defense contracting or productivity metrics. It's a reminder